Nice background, Leora.
Something to dream about.
Yes. Okay.
Hi, Geshe-ma.
Hi, Shir.
Okay, so before we start, thank you, Geshe-ma, again for teaching us, and thank you everyone for joining. Please, everyone, notice that we had a change in the clock, also in Germany and also in Israel. So this is the time that the teaching starts. So if the clock for you is different today, then just notice it. Other than that, you have here in the chat the link for the dana. So if you can and want, you have the option to practice giving also in the form of dana, and to support the teacher and the activity of the Dharma Friends of Israel. So thank you, everyone, and Geshe-ma.
Okay, I'll start then. Okay. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, great. So as usual, let's start with some meditation, some breathing meditation. And then to set our motivation, I'll lead you as usual through setting the motivation. And then in order to set the right kind of motivation to make the following session most effective, visualize that in the space in front of you is Buddha Shakyamuni appearing in the form of a fully ordained monk. And then near the Buddha are the great masters from India, such as Nagarjuna, Ayadeva, Buddhapalita, and most importantly, Chandakirti. And all the other great masters. Who are all in the nature of your own personal teacher. And also visualize that all around you are all suffering sentient beings, unable to free themselves from being controlled by contaminated karma and afflictive emotions. And then think that we all have this opportunity. We have found a method to becoming enlightened. And may today once again be one of those causes that will eventually result in our full enlightenment for the sake of all those suffering sentient beings. It's from the depth of your heart, generate that aspiration. Thinking that I have the potential to become a Buddha and I will do all I can to reach that state. And with this motivation, let's recite the prayers together. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the accumulation of merits of practicing generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the accumulation of merits of practicing generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the accumulation of merits of practicing generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. And then the four immeasurables. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings never be separated from happiness that is free from suffering. And may all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. Okay, great. While we're still studying the third chapter of the entry into the middle way, which is mainly, or which the main topic of which is patience. So last time we already discussed, I think, 5 or 6 of those verses, starting at the beginning. First, Chandrakirti gave an explanation for why this particular level, this particular ground, which is the third Bodhisattva ground, that's associated mainly in terms of the practice, practice from the point of view of the 6 perfections, it's mainly, or the 10 perfections, it's mainly associated with patience. But why is it called the luminous ground? It's because of this appearance that bodhisattvas on that level have, which is like a dawning of red or orange light. So these are just appearance to the mind that are indications of the progress of this particular bodhisattva. And then right after that, the text talks about why on that level patience is so special. Why is it considered to be well, preeminent or surpassing, different to before, in other words. So we talked about that, that kind of patience that a bodhisattva has, explained by way of the analogy of someone chopping away the one thing we find most precious, our own body. That is so precious to us. And so even if that's injured, if someone injures that, here in the case of a bodhisattva, not experiencing the slightest disturbance of the mind, so not only not getting angry, but also no disturbance of the mind due to their realization, of course, of reality, but also their great love and compassion for this person actually harming them. So in other words, on that level, the bodhisattva is just totally focused on that person harming the bodhisattva, so only concerned for his or her well-being, and no longer any well, there's still concern in the sense of course, wanting to become enlightened, etc., but mainly for the sake of others, and then including the person who harms the bodhisattva. And then we talked about, let's get back to what we're used to. So the ordinary state, how can we be patient, etc., as like part of this, well, making this text, using this text as instructions, personal instructions directed at us. Of course, we're not, well, some of you may be on that level, I cannot say, but if in case not, well, wherever we are in terms of our practice, these are instructions for us to practice exactly this patience. Now, last time I didn't really talk about anger, like what actually is anger, because usually people know what anger is. We've all been angry. And so it doesn't seem necessary to define it. Well, in a way, of course, it is necessary to define it to understand this mental factor better. But it's not like if I talk about anger, you wouldn't know what I'm talking about, because, as I said, we're at least, well, we're angry ourselves, or we've seen other people getting angry. We've observed that. But actually, there's a definition that is given, or there's an explanation that is given with regard to anger, which is important. And at the same time, what is also important to understand anger is what gives rise to anger. How do we get from just being happy and peaceful to a point where, due to some change in circumstances, or maybe just us remembering something, we suddenly get very angry and our peace of mind is gone? What is that process? What gives rise to the anger? Now, what gives rise to the anger, you probably heard by now, it's a misperception, a misapprehension, a basic misapprehension of reality. Okay, so we haven't really talked much about what that means, etc. So you've all heard about it probably to one degree or another, have some sense of a misapprehension, which will be discussed in the 6th chapter very extensively. But just for the sake of understanding anger better, what happens? Well, there's this basic misapprehension of believing there's an intrinsic I, there's something within me. Well, if I had to locate it, of course, I wouldn't locate it. I wouldn't say it's the chair over there or the person over there. No, my I is with this body. And somewhere within me, there's this person, there's this I, there's this self. So that's this apprehension with regard to myself. There's something within me. There's something intrinsic to me. And then there's something intrinsic to you. And that differentiates you from me. That allows me to say we're different, because there's something within you that is different from that which is within me. That makes me me and you you. And that's not the body, and that's not the mind. There's something more. That's the sense we get thinking of ourselves, in particular when we grow up, we go traveling to find ourselves, right? There's this whole idea, there's a whole travel business based on that, go find yourself, go out and discover the world, and maybe use other means and methods to go find yourself, climb Mount Everest, whatever it is. But we have a sense there's something that can be found, and there's something that is important to us. There's a sense it's very important to me to find it. And we have a hard time to pinpoint it, which is why we set out to actually find it. So the sense is something within us, something intrinsic, and something intrinsic in a chair and in a cushion and so forth, that makes it a cushion, that makes it a chair, that makes it this, that, and the other. But it doesn't stop there. There's also a sense, because this is my mind, of course, thinking, oh, this is me, and that's the rest of the world. So me, my mind has a very natural, this is typical for any mind, wish to be happy, wish not to suffer. I would even describe it, the natural state of every mind is to be calm, is to be satisfied. That would be a natural, this would be just as water in its actual form, it's just pure water. So our mind is actually its pure state, its actual state is a state of peace and satisfaction. And so we wish for that. The mind automatically wishes for that. But now, together with this sense, there's this I, there's also a sense, well, the happiness that has to do with this mind, which is owned by this I, that happiness is closer to my mind, and therefore it's more important. This is closer to me. It's my happiness. It's my mind's happiness, and therefore my happiness. It's closer to your happiness. And because this is the I and you're something else, therefore my happiness is more important, which is an holding on to me, and my happiness is more important, and that's described as self-cherishing or the self-centered attitude, a type of attachment to the I and my happiness as more important than yours. And from there, we then look around the world, things that make us happy, that don't make us happy. So I talked about this a little bit before, I believe. Well, maybe I'm not sure when I did, but the point is, I see an object, a feeling of happiness arises, and now I believe that happiness that my mind experiences is within the object. It's in the nature of this object, which is now I have a sense of something intrinsic in that object because it gives me happiness. There's this happiness intrinsic in the object, and now I want it. I need it because I need to be happy. I have this strong urge to be happy. Okay, so then I want this and I don't want that if it doesn't cause me that kind of emotion. The opposite, if it makes me unhappy, I don't want to be near it, etc. Anyway, so whenever I make contact with the world, whenever I interact with the things around me, there is a sense this is good and this is bad, all in relation to how I perceive myself. And this sense of this is good, bad, or neither of the two, especially when it comes to good, something good I want and bad I really don't want, I exaggerate its goodness or its negativity. Out of this sense of I, out of this self-centeredness. So I exaggerate its goodness or its bad, its negativity, because I exaggerate the importance of the I anyway. That's where I'm starting off with. In fact, I exaggerate the mode of existence of the I. There's just really something within me, and there's something within you, etc. So based on that exaggeration, giving an existence to things that goes beyond what is actually possible, then that leads to an exaggerated sense of self-importance and an exaggerated sense this is good and this is bad. So in the case of anger, how do I get to anger? How do I get angry? Well, I start off, of course, with these steps of misapprehension, perceiving this inherent I, then self-cherishing as just described. And now I encounter someone insults me, for instance. I encounter a situation and I have the thought, this is bad. But because it's me, it's bad. I mean, like someone insults me, this negativity, it's a lot worse than if it had happened, if this insult had been directed at my neighbor, for instance. Then, okay, well, that's too bad. That's an insult. There's not that sense of exaggeration, but I exaggerate. I exaggerate first before I actually get angry. And this goes very quickly. There's a sense, oh, how dare they? And then next moment, anger arises, which is that exaggerated sense. There's an exaggerated sense of, the negativity of whatever has been done to me, the insult in this case. and then the wish to be separated from that. So anger could be like this feeling of being repelled by that, this exaggerated sense of just being repelled by it. Or if it's stronger, the wish to harm the other person, or to be away from that harm, or to be away from that person that I associate with that harm, or even taking revenge, retaliating for this harm, whatever is the kind of reaction by that anger. And this, I think we're all familiar with. But what is important is this exaggerating aspect that that mind in itself is just exaggerating. And once I calm down, once the anger calms down, that is like maybe the anger, the other person apologizes or whatever, or I'm distracted and I'm no longer angry, now I can see that my mental reaction, that anger, was exaggerating the mode of negativity, the degree of negativity that was exaggerated, which is why we talk about getting mad. I'm getting mad. I'm doing crazy things. I'm doing exaggerate. Out of this anger, I react in an exaggerated way, which I think is really nicely expressed by that word. I get mad because I do things I would ordinarily not do if I'm not angry. My reaction, I may shout, I may talk much louder, or my face turns bright red. My arms are like moving around. There's all this is force behind, because this exaggerate out of this exaggerated state of mind, and I can no longer think straight. The angrier I get, the more exaggerated I see it, the harder it gets to make a decision that is, well, most appropriate in that situation. So that's anger. And there are different degrees of that. Of course, there's stronger anger, and then there's the very subtle kind of just that person that I just do not like them, or yeah. And of course, there are other mental factors that are similar, like resentment, which is a type of bitterness. Resentment, feeling bitter, or a feeling of indignance, like feeling indignant, like, oh, how dare they? But that's called resentments. It's subtler than that. It's a secondary function of the mind. But the point is here, of course, patience is also important for that kind of resentment, etc. But anger is really that force that is most to look out for. Now, as we've heard last time, of course, it doesn't make sense to get angry, etc. So we've had quite a few discussions on that. I hope that you've taken the opportunity to also put this into practice. And of course, we'll continue with this. But this is also a great time to talk about something that Lama Tsongkhapa quite beautifully explains in his commentary, clarifying the intent, as Thupten Jinpa calls the title, or as he translates the title. And you have a draft of that text. If you're interested in reading this, it's not exactly, it doesn't read like a novel, as you may expect. But if you start on page 87 and you read it, and I'll go through it, go to 89, 99, 90. Yeah, 87 to 90. If you read this, 87 is only at the bottom. Points emerging as side considerations. Very, very interesting. So I didn't plan to talk about this, because you particularly are interested just in the verses. So, well, we want to get through all these verses, and I want to do more than one verse a day. But I thought, this is so precious. It's so precious, and it teaches so much, that I decided, all right, never mind. Even if we don't get to do a single verse today, let's see. I want to discuss this. Well, at least we get to a particular verse. Now, from what we did last time, I don't think I need to repeat that. It's pretty self-explanatory about how anger doesn't make sense, and the situation doesn't get better, and we inflict the same harm again to experience. If we get angry and we react out of this anger, we will experience, from a karmic point of view, we will experience that result once again, which just now, finally, the karma has ripened in the form of the insult, and now I create new karma, etc. So this is not hard to understand. But what is hard to understand is what is discussed here in connection with getting angry. Because what does Chandrakirti talk about here? He speaks in verse 6. He talks about, indeed, anger felt toward the conqueror's children. In other words, anger that is felt towards bodhisattvas destroys in an instant the virtue gathered by generosity and morality over 100 eons. Thus, there's no evil similar to intolerance. Here he uses a different word, which is also intolerance, anger. Yeah, well, actually, it's anger mainly. It's this emotion, or this not being able to bear it, kind of like expressing itself in different ways, and usually described as anger. Now, it talks about something. What does it say here? Not only does it not make sense, etc., but it actually, anger interacts with our mind, obviously, in a way that it guides our actions. Of course, it's responsible for us acting in a certain way. But what's also really important is the idea that our mind works in such a way that nothing our mind does, and here I'm talking about the mental consciousness. Of course, there's also some aspect with regard to the sense consciousnesses, but you may have noticed the sense consciousnesses in Buddhism, they're not discussed much. They're not the types of minds that experience afflictions. They're much more passive, if you like, than the mental consciousness. The mental consciousness is that which becomes enlightened, etc. So the mental consciousness experiences, well, it can become an afflictive emotions. It can take on the function of an afflictive emotions. It can become angry, in other words, so take on that function. And whatever the mental consciousness does, and that's important, it doesn't get lost. Now, this is true in modern science in terms of material objects, physical objects. Any action, any reaction, it has consequences. It leaves a residue. It leaves something behind, which again has consequences for the objects around it. But that's just on the physical basis. Now, of course, it works differently with the mind, since the mind is non-physical. But what's similar is that any thought we think, anything we do, it leaves something on the mind. On the mind. It's hard to say because the mind is not like a round bowl that you leave something on it. It's also like this language we use, like you leave something on it or in it or with it. In the end, it doesn't make any difference which word you use, because it's not like you have like a bowl, or it's not like a cup you leave something within it, or it's not like water you mix something with. It's so in the end you just use these words because these words are used usually to describe material things, and that's all we have. So we can use on, in, within, with it. We can use all these words. The point is, something remains with the mind. Every time there's a thought, a potential remains, like a residue. And again, it's so hard for us to imagine, to visualize, unless we take material objects and use them as metaphor, or use them as analogies. So like imprints. We talk about an imprint. So something is left on the mind. So the mind is no longer the same that it was in a moment before. So in every moment, our mind changes because we have different thoughts, and all these thoughts leave residues. And as it's sometimes described, it leaves imprints in the mind. But that gives us almost the sense that in each and every imprint lives on its own, and the mind gets fuller and fuller. It gets more and more filled with imprints. That's the kind of sense we get. And yes, okay, it gets fuller and fuller, but that's all right, because some of the imprints ripen, some get destroyed, etc. So, all right, and anyway, it's non-physical, so we don't run out of space. But there is really this sense of like just separate entities called the imprints that are separate from each other. But it's not like that. I mean, I've asked my teachers about it, and when I asked them a question, I was coming from that kind of perspective, and they said to me, well, don't think of it that way. It's not like there are all these different dots in the mind, and they're all like, this imprint is over here and that one over there. No, it doesn't work like that. It's like the whole mind is affected. The whole mind, the mind itself, each thought just has changed the mind, has left a residue which changes the mind to a certain degree, however subtle, however unnoticeable for us that change is. Okay. And this residue, like I used a different word, I I use a different word, residue, like imprint, for instance, whatever you want to call it, seed. It holds a potential. It's left there, and because it creates something in the future, it creates right away maybe a habit. Okay, so it's responsible for creating habits. I have the thought once, I have it again. For instance, if you're not an angry person in general, but then you get together with this one person and suddenly you find yourself getting angry today and again tomorrow and then again the day after. And before long, you now have a habit. Whereas previously it was very little that would make you angry. Now the bus driver looks at you in a funny way and it really pisses you off. Why? Well, because you've made a habit. Your mind is became habituated to getting angry, because 3 times angry, 4 times angry, the residue that was left on the mind, the residue from getting angry, now is responsible. It has the function of easily turning the mind into an angry mind. There's some residue left, and that we call a habit. Previously, there wasn't such a strong habit. Now it's there. So that's one function of what's left, what residue is left. But all these residues, what they also do, well, on the very basic level, they obstruct the mind. These residues obstruct the mind because they all arise from that basic misapprehension that's responsible for the residues. As in, like, as I said, misapprehension of reality leads to self-cherishing, leads to the exaggerating attitude, exaggerating positivity, negativity, then giving rise to certain emotions. And in particular, the negative ones, they're the ones to look out for. And then all of these, even the positive ones, even our love or even our compassion is influenced by our misapprehension. So then they leave a residue, which, because it comes out of that misapprehension, it just obstructs the mind. It obstructs the mind in its ability to just be aware of more things. Okay, that's one aspect. The habituation I've already mentioned. But also, since there's no subjective world, sorry, the other way around, there's no objective world, since everything we experience really is an experience of the mind. You cannot talk about any experience in your life that was not an experience of your mind. You can't talk about anything that is true, anything that is your reality, that is part of your reality, that there's nothing that is part of your reality that you have not perceived by your own mind. Okay? Anything that exists for you only because it was perceived by your own mind. Okay? So that's your reality, comes from the mind, obviously. So if you believe there's something objective there, that's just an illusion that you're perceiving an objective world. That would mean you could perceive a world without using your mind. Impossible. Okay. Now, therefore, all our experiences also are determined by these residues in our mind. Having all sorts of experiences, sometimes happy experiences, sometimes not, everything, that is also the result, and that's called karma. That the residue, not only is it obstructs our mind from being able to perceive things. I mean, we can perceive a lot, but there's a lot we just cannot know. We're quite limited in what we can know because of that basic misapprehension. And of course, what it gives rise to, and all the residues left on the mind because of those. Of course, also the residue of the misapprehension itself. That doesn't even need to be mentioned. Every mind, every thought leaves something behind. Now, going back to the anger, it's so complicated. With every mind, we can do that. But let's just focus on the anger. So with the anger, it leaves behind these tendencies to be angry more often, more violently. The more angry we get, every time the more residues you leave, the more the tendency builds up. Then, as I said, the obstruction is there, but also it leads to certain experiences that are in what's the word? Concordance with that, are in accordance with this mental state. Okay, so if it's the wish to harm someone, the wish to inflict pain on another person, then because of that volitional aspect, it leads to a painful experience. And of course, what's more important is not just the thought, but acting on it. So the thought that gives rise to certain speech, to certain bodily actions, which of course cannot be separated from the mind. They're all directed by the mind. So all our experiences in every moment come from what was left on the mind. Not just on their own. Of course, they're also, the external world is there too. So there's an interaction between our mind and the external world that doesn't exist objectively, but still a subjectively existent world. Now, because of their interactions, we have different experiences that ripen in the form of karmic experiences. So you can see how this is really important, that everything revolves around our mind and the residues it leaves and karma, how it's all just a law of nature, which is such that whatever you leave, whatever you reap, or whatever you sow, I should say, you reap eventually. Okay. And what's more, even more important, now let's go to the next step. I spoke about anger leaving a residue. And that is true for love leaves a residue, and forgiveness leaves a residue, and attachment, all our different states of mind, which are at one point in time, usually there's one state of mind. It's very rare that there's more than one. Usually I'm attached to this person, I'm angry with another person, I feel love to a third person, or I hate this person, then I love them again, it gets back and forth. But our mind keeps changing between those different emotions, positive ones, negative ones, some neutral ones as well, and they leave residues. The stronger ones are the positive ones, and the negative ones, they're stronger, they're more powerful, and they leave stronger imprints in the mind. And they react with each other. So like I said, it seems like, oh, there is the one imprint here and one imprint there, because we call them separately. So in our mind, there seem to be one here, one over there. They got different names, so they're like totally different entities. No. They interact with each other. They interact with each other all the time, which accounts for the fact that positive actions can actually exhaust, the word that they use is purify. But that's just with regard to the fact that we see negative karma as something negative. We talk about getting rid of it as purifying it. It's just another way of saying getting rid of something I don't want. Well, that's called purifying. So if I have a really powerful thought of love and compassion for others, that can actually, and I don't know how that exactly works because I don't even know my mind properly anyway. So it's really hard to tell exactly on this very subtle level of these residues what excludes the other. Okay, so in the case of a strong thought of love, I could actually get rid of some of the negative residues on the mind. But in the same way, if I have very negative and angry thoughts, they can also get rid of some of the positive aspects, positive parts of my mind. So there's this constant renewal of the residues on my mind. So don't think of it as like, oh, I did some purification last week. I made a few changes. So a little bit I purified and nothing else happened. Of course, we accumulate merit, we accumulate positive karma, and we destroy positive karma, and we accumulate negative karma, and we destroy negative karma all the time. It cannot be any other way. Okay, so this is my sense of it, and I haven't seen it exactly explained anywhere, but it makes sense from everything I've learned so far, that there is this thing called imprints, this residue, and because of its different functions, we give it different names: karma, tendency, obstructions, and so forth. But the point, why does this come up here? Well, because Chandrakirti mentions in verse 6 that our anger, in particular that point that I've just made, it can destroy positive karma in a very powerful way, more than any other affliction, more than any other afflictive emotions. There are other negative ones, but many negative ones have the aspect of anger in them. In what way? Well, think about jealousy. No, jealousy. Yeah, jealousy or envy. Envy is a mental quality. It's an afflictive emotion that has the aspect of anger within it, because I have attachment towards something another person has, and because they have it and I don't have it, I don't like them. I don't like it that they have that. And that's envy. So there's the aspect of anger is there. I don't like the person who has the thing that I need, that I deserve and they don't, kind of thing. So there's attachment and anger. They're both resentment, anger. All right. And then when there's attachment, anger is never far from our mind, because the more attached I am, the more angry I get with that which may threaten my object of attachment. Okay. So in a way, anger either is part of an afflictive emotion, or it cannot really be separated. If I have a lot of arrogance, if I'm very arrogant, then if you say anything that goes against my sense of me and my achievement and what have you, leads to anger. Okay, so it's an emotion that is there, that is can easily arise the stronger our attachment is. Plus, it destroys positive actions because it's harmful, because in its nature is such, it's this force that induces harmful actions. If I don't have anger, if I don't have dislike, if I don't have any coarser or subtler form of anger, I don't develop the wish to harm anyone. The wish to harm someone comes out of that anger. Not every anger is that wish, like I said, but it can lead to that. And that wish to harm, it destroys all the positive aspects out of wishing to benefit someone. Oh, okay. Now, this is an interesting idea. Now, what this one chapter that Lama Tsongkhapa talks about, that he explains, he's saying, what does that actually mean? Anger destroys root virtue. What does that mean? Destroy as in like it's totally gone? Oh, how does that work? Can it actually totally destroy a non-virtue? Okay, is it that powerful? And Lama Tsongkhapa says no. No, destroy means something specific, number one. And also, what does that mean? You get anger towards a bodhisattva, you destroy in an instant the virtue gathered by generosity and morality over 100 eons. Okay, these eons, how long is an eon anyway? There's this way of calculating, I forget now how you calculate an eon, but it's a really long time, all right? Really long time, okay. So, and 100 of these really long times, the virtue you've gathered, or you destroy that if you get angry with a bodhisattva. Okay, all right. Well, why? Why? What is it? What is it so special about bodhisattvas? If I get angry with my neighbor, why do I not destroy that much? But the point is, anger can actually destroy virtue, just as virtue can destroy anger. And what that exactly means, Dhamma Tsongkhapa explains, and I'll go into this. It's part of this passage I explained to you. But first of all, what needs to be classified, what needs to be specified here, and this is what the commentaries explain us, that here, when it says a bodhisattva gets angry with a bodhisattva, someone gets angry with a bodhisattva and destroys 100 eons of merit or merit, it's just like this huge amount. It's really not, you can't really count it. It's actually not countable. But let's just, for the sake of the argument, to understand it better, this is also what Nagarjuna, for instance, says in his Ratnavali. In the third chapter, for instance, he talks about, he says, well, actually, all this merit that you need for this, that, and the other, or in this case, yeah, the virtue here that has been created is actually not countable. You can't measure it. It's just for the sake of understanding that we put a number to it. So this is quite similar here. But it gives this random number, 100 eons. Actually, in the commentary, it says, actually, it's 1,000 eons for us. If we're an ordinary person, this incredible amount of merit that we've created over 1,000 eons get destroyed. Those 100 eons are a bodhisattva gets angry with another bodhisattva. Okay, so in other words, a bodhisattva can get angry. A bodhisattva gets angry. Okay, number one, a bodhisattva gets angry and he destroys. This is an interesting idea. He destroys his virtue. Well, a bodhisattva dedicates. And we've heard anger cannot destroy a virtue that was dedicated. And here you have a bodhisattva, because this is what it's very clearly explained in the commentaries, even in the self-commentary. So Chandrakirti himself, in his own commentary on his own text, he's composed a self-commentary. He says, well, the anger, I believe he says, actually, well, definitely Lama Tsongkhapa does, and I have to reread that section. But anyway, so the point is that here it says a bodhisattva gets angry with another bodhisattva. A bodhisattva, so if I, as bodhisattvas, there are many different levels. So you can be a beginner bodhisattva, you can be a bodhisattva on the path of accumulation, path of preparation. So there are these different paths, of course, that lead to enlightenment, and there are different levels. So Lama Tsongkhapa differentiates between getting angry with a bodhisattva who has greater attainments, getting angry with a bodhisattva who's on the same level, or getting angry with the bodhisattva who's on the lower level. Why is that negative? Why is any of that negative anyway? Well, because the bodhisattva is someone who set out to benefit all sentient beings. And anger directed towards a bodhisattva, even if it's not with this wish to harm this person, but there's still this force of being against that person. And that means because a bodhisattva, his or her life is totally dedicated towards sentient beings, I'm indirectly also going against all sentient beings. I'm indirectly also going against them. So that's the logic behind that. Now, as an ordinary person, that makes total sense. I only care about myself. I only care. I'm just me, me, me the whole time. And there's this person who has changed their view. It's not me, me, me. It's only others, 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 others. So first others and then me. Okay. So this person, if I get angry with them, and especially I act out of it, of course I destroy a lot of root virtue. That makes sense. But even among the bodhisattvas, because the higher you get, like really higher as in like your achievement, the stronger your bodhicitta. It gets stronger and stronger. Your dedication towards other sentient beings, it gets stronger. You're more and more determined to work for others. So because of that strength, you're also more effective in your effort. And therefore, again, if you harm that person, that's a lot worse than harming someone else. I mean, that's just common sense. You harm Mother Teresa or you harm, I don't know, Hitler. Okay? What is the greater non-virtue? Of course, the person who goes out of, in the case of Mother Teresa, goes out of her way to work towards, what a great non-virtue. Okay? In the case of someone who does something terrible, well, they're actually doing this person a favor in a way. Okay? Well, if you have the wisdom to you know that, etc. Don't need to get into that. But the point is, in this wholeness, the Dalai Lama has once said it, for someone, we wish in general to have a long life, but for someone to be terrible with other people who is a nasty, angry, aggressive person harming others, well, for their own sake, they better have a short life. Okay. Now, anger can, well, harm other people in such a sense that with regard to a bodhisattva, as I said, the harm is directed at this person and indirectly towards sentient beings. And the stronger the bodhisattva has dedicated him or herself towards sentient being, the stronger the harm to the person getting angry. So that explains it. Getting angry with the Buddha anyway. So therefore, this is what is said here, that what is explicitly taught here, what is explicitly like what the words talk about, like what the words mention, they mention a bodhisattva who's not on the same level as another bodhisattva. If that bodhisattva gets angry with that other bodhisattva who's higher in terms of practice, in terms of dedication, etc., has moved already higher in the sense of the mental development, then they can actually destroy, by getting angry, that thought of anger can destroy the virtue accumulated over 100 eons. It's not that much. We've lived since beginning this time, so it's really not like, it's not like you're not left with anything. Okay. And by implication, explicitly, that's what it says. Implicitly, it means for us as ordinary people, if we get angry with the bodhisattva, that means 1,000 times. Okay. Now, it's just more. The numbers, of course, it's not really measurable. So it shows us getting angry is potentially dangerous because we don't know who's a bodhisattva or not. Okay, so okay, we usually feel like, oh, I know this person is not a bodhisattva. Really, honestly, it's really hard to tell. But in some cases, yeah, right, if they act in a very selfish way, it's hard to think. But never mind, we still don't know who's a bodhisattva. So another really good reason not to get angry. But to take it philosophically, what does it tell us here? That if a bodhisattva gets angry with another bodhisattva, what does the bodhisattva do? Dedicate his or her life towards enlightenment. Everything, all the virtues they accumulate, they're dedicated towards enlightenment. And haven't we heard that once a virtue is dedicated, it cannot be destroyed by anger? What is this here? Shantideva, this is also, Shantideva says the same thing in his in his Bodhisattva way of life. If you read this, so Lama Tsongkhapa actually quotes Shantideva here. I don't have the quote right here, but anyway, so saying again, if this is, yeah, anyway, I don't have it right here. I meant to go show you a few verses, but then I forgot. Never mind, you'll find them. But here you also, I mean, Shantideva talks about it. So is Shantideva saying, what does a bodhisattva do? Dedicate all his virtue, all his or her virtue towards enlightenment, and still they can be destroyed. Aha. So what's going on? That seems contradictory, doesn't it? Would you agree? Seems contradictory. So are they destroyed or are they not destroyed? Well, Lama Tsongkhapa says they are. Well, to a certain degree, but destroyed means something very specific. Anyway, destroyed doesn't mean totally gone, that the imprint is totally gone. That's number one. So on page 87, he well, not 87 as such, but then throughout the text, he talks about, for instance, can I destroy anger, like totally destroy anger? And the answer is yes, I can totally destroy anger. How do I destroy anger? By realizing emptiness directly. So the mind that realizes emptiness directly, that can actually totally get rid of anger and its imprints and all that. So this mind can actually destroy it. But destroy can also mean that the calm, it's still a residue that's left on the mind, but the potential for it to arise, to have a certain result, that disappears. So like a seed, you know, you still have a seed when you burn it, but when you burn a seed, you still say there's a seed, but the potential to give rise to a certain result, that's gone. And actually in the beginning of the section that I mentioned, Lama Tsongkhapa also says, he quotes a sutra, which is from Shantideva's Compendium of Training, not his guide to the Bodhisattva way of life, but there's another famous text, Siksha Samuchaya, it's also called, or in English, Compendium of Trainings. And in there, he gives a quote of a sutra between a person called Upali and the Buddha. Okay, he asked the Buddha, can non-virtue be destroyed, or what happens? Like, how does such root virtue come to be thinned, become thinned, like get thinner, reduced, in other words, thoroughly purged and completely exhausted? So here he says, actually, many possibilities depending on, for instance, the anger. In the case of anger, it can destroy root virtue. It can just weaken the root virtue. So weaken in the sense that even though the virtue you previously had was to experience this great, to have this great experience, this wonderful, great experience out of a virtuous action in the past, now that's thinned down. This is now reduced, and the result is not that great. Okay. Or you can have like a small reduction, a medium reduction, and a total reduction, a total exhaustion. He says this here. So to thin, it's a weaker form of exhaustion, but it does not destroy all the effects. It appears that purging, the medium, refers to a medium level of exhaustion, while ending refers to great degree of exhaustion. Okay, so that the seed is totally burned or only a little bit burned and medium burned and then totally burned. Okay, so those are these three scenarios he describes, that the anger, depending on its strength, it depends on the how you deal with it, basically, that can weaken a positive virtue. It can, and so forth, as I just explained. So it's not as black and white as it may appear. All right. And then he quotes two sutras that you probably have heard of. The teaching of Akshamati Sutra. You may have heard of this sutra. When His Holiness gave teachings recently on Lama Tsongkhapa's Essence of True Eloquence, the part that is on Madhyamika, So this text by Lama Tsongkhapa consists of an explanation of the Chittamatra, the mind-only school, and the Madhyamika, the middle way school. And in this Madhyamika part, the teachings of Akshamati Sutra is very important because it's like a guiding sutra. Besides what is explained here, it's this very important sutra because it helps us to understand from the Madhyamika school point of view which teachings of the Buddha are definitive and which ones are interpretative. Okay, so this whole, what can we take literally and what not? So you may know enough about Buddhist philosophy that you're aware there's this distinction. We cannot take everything literally, what the Buddha said, in other words. Okay, so the sutra, the teachings of Akshamati Sutra is very important from that perspective. But this is not about this here. It's just cited because it's an important sutra and it says important things. So what does it say here? He says with virtue being destroyed by anger, he talks about dedicating virtue the way we do after we receive the teachings. For instance, we always dedicate virtue. So he says here, in the teachings of Akshamati Sutra, quoted in the Compendium of Sutras, so this teaching of the Akshamati Sutra was quoted in Nagarjuna's text, Compendium of Sutras, citing the simile of how a drop of water that falls into the great ocean does not dry up. Okay, so here it talks about, think of a drop of water. If the drop of water falls onto a stone, it easily dries up. Okay, but if that drop of water falls onto the ocean, how can it dry up, right? It's very unlikely to dry up because it's all with these other drops. So here, this is similar to the roots of virtue that have been dedicated towards enlightenment, that they do not exhaust until the attainment of awakening. All right, we may have heard this teaching. That's important. Now, I'm stressing these sutric teachings, of course, because, well, it's so important to actually go back to the sutras. And in particular, I continue now translating Geshe Thupten Pesang's teaching. I've mentioned him on a few occasions, and now I make time every day. I've found a way in which I need relatively little time to translate his teachings. And he is just incredible. Geshe has got an insight into the Dharma. There's no one like him. Now, well, you're probably aware there's this website with teachings. You can get at least orally translated teachings, and he's just amazing. And he talks a lot about the sutras. He reads the sutras. He says every statement that we make, we should go back to the sutras. We can't just make statements wildly and just say this is what it is without having a source. Now, Geshe could do it because he's read all these sutras. What's so beautiful here is, of course, this passage that I'm talking about, it's just quoting sutras. Lama Tsongkhapa is not making any statements without relying on the sutras. This is his great strength. This is why, and you may not be aware of that, but Geshe Thupten Pesang, he has composed 2 amazing books, but only in Tibetan. I'm not sure anyone will ever be determined enough to translate these books into English. At some point they will be translated, but they're this big, each 2 volumes. What did he do in those texts? It's truly amazing. He took the entire Lamrim, and you know the Lamrim, how thick the Lamrim is. And because for years he's been reading the sutras, he looked and found all the sources for everything Lama Tsongkhapa said. So in all the Lamrim, for each outline, whatever statement Lama Tsongkhapa made, he went to go through the sutras and found the sutras and said, this is where the Buddha said such and such. And so Lama Tsongkhapa explained, I don't know, the precious human life, the opportunities, the leisures and all this. This is in sutra, this and this. It's amazing. It's amazing. You can go back and find. So Lama Tsongkhapa never taught anything unless it was said by the Buddha. So it's so important to go back to the sources. And this has become a little lost in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, where His Holiness sometimes jokingly says the sutras are usually on the altar. They're next to the altar. So every beautiful altar, like in the big monastery, always has a collection of all the sutric teachings that were translated into Tibetan, but no one ever takes them down, really. I mean, they're all wrapped up really nicely. And of course, sometimes sutras are read as part of a ritual, etc. But His Holiness says we should read the sutras. We should go back. We should print them in the form, and people are doing this now, print them in book form so we can actually read the sutras and don't have to unwrap them and you know, very difficult to actually take them down from their usual place on an altar, which is not necessary. We just need to have them in a different form. And like I said, Geshe Pasang did this. So whenever I ask him a question, whenever he never answers right away, he takes time to find a source. Okay, he finds a source. He doesn't just say something, he finds a source. All right, so this is so beautiful here because here it is in the Akshamati Sutra. It actually says we have a name of a sutra here. First we have, well, it didn't give a name, but it still was a sutra or Pali and Buddha, this conversation. And then here, teachings of Akshamati Sutra, where it talks about if you dedicate the root virtue, it doesn't dry up. Okay, now, having said that, then there's another sutra, the Array of Trees Sutra, gives another example or like an analogy, simile or analogy of how, so this is a little bit complicated. So let's say you have 1,000 ounces, you have a huge amount of metal, just ordinary metal, base metal. And now you want to transform it into gold. And you need this elixir, which is like a mercury elixir, like an ounce of only that, which is known as this elixir, this mercury kind of, it's not just mercury, it's probably something else as well. So this mercury mixture, if you apply this 1 ounce to these 1,000 ounces of base metal, then this 1 ounce of mercury potion, that will turn the base metal into gold. Okay, there's just this idea of, you know, turning metal into gold. But it never consumes the potion. It never the metal, the base metal. It's not like it gets absorbed into the metal. No, it doesn't do that. It remains there. So what does that stand for here? Mercury is like the awakened mind. It's like bodhicitta that cannot be consumed, is not sucked in by the afflictive emotions. Okay, so the awakened mind is not destroyed by the afflictive emotions. It can be temporarily go, but it doesn't mean that once you have really strong bodhicitta, you can let go of bodhicitta because you get angry, but that's different. You let go. However, once it's strong enough and you no longer let go of it, none of the afflictive emotions can destroy it. So there are these two quotes. I don't know, maybe I'm boring you with this. I don't know. I hope I'm not. But it's just, I find this so interesting, this explanation, and I thought I'd share this with you. So what does this mean? What does this mean? So because of such statements, Lama Tsongkhapa says, if one thinks that the awakening mind, as well as the roots of virtue sustained by it, and those virtues, roots, though these virtues dedicated towards the awakening cannot be destroyed by anger, that's not the case. Aha, right? We've heard this so many times. They cannot be destroyed by anger. He says that cannot be true, for it has been stated that even the virtuous roots of the great bodhisattvas can be destroyed, right? Because it says here in Bodhisattva's way of life, as a bodhisattva, you've dedicated, I mean, I forgot that virtue. But like, I mean, anyway, I thought about this today and I thought like, well, If I dedicated all my virtue, I could just say, I dedicate all the virtues I've ever created towards enlightenment. My virtues could never be destroyed, right? I mean, like, how much do I have to dedicate for that to be the case? Really, if you just think like, as in like a debate situation, okay, we say very easily, well, my anger cannot destroy my root virtue. Okay, I kind of say that. But if I just now say, I dedicate it all, I dedicate everything, does that mean it doesn't happen? And that's not true. All right, so what it means here, what it actually means here, and he says then, so the meaning of the first sutra cited above, the sutra of the teaching of Akshamati Sutra, is that these roots of virtue do not come to exhaust as a result of bringing forth its effects. It does not suggest. So what it really means is that these virtues will not ripen in something ordinary, but if they're not destroyed by anger, they will ripen. Let's say they continue on, then they will ripen in the form of enlightenment and not in the form of, I don't know, getting a bagel for breakfast. I mean, something that's really not beneficial, because a virtuous action can actually, of course, ripen in different ways. But if we dedicate it towards enlightenment, that's like making sure there's not going to be an ordinary kind of result, but something great, a great result. Okay, so it doesn't get used up. It does get used up, of course, for other things, but there's still positive experiences because of that. No, but the main result, it will become a really powerful cause towards enlightenment. But it can be destroyed. But destroyed means not totally destroyed, but it's reduced. It's reduced in that. So this is what he later on explains, and I don't want to go into it. You can read it on your own. It's going to be reduced. And I remember my teachers, when we studied this, they said it's not totally gone, but it gets reduced. And so exhaust or destroy doesn't mean the seed totally goes, but it's reduced, right? So I think so that the anger cannot do any harm. I don't think that's true, because otherwise we could just dedicate it and be as angry as we want. It doesn't destroy any virtue, right? So that would unfortunately be nice if that was the case, that it wouldn't destroy anything. But no, it makes total sense to me, and especially with the Bodhisattva saying that. But we've kind of made it a little safer. Let's put it that way. A little safer, and it's probably harder to destroy it in the same way as it would happen when we didn't dedicate it. This far, I think we can go. All right, this much I just wanted to let you know, because we say it again and again, it can't destroy it, and we don't think about it. But here he's giving these beautiful quotes, and there's like a debate going back and forth, and you can actually follow it and read through it. There's more to it, but there's just not enough time to do more than that. Yeah, so this I wanted to share with you. This reflects a little bit also, of course, the way we study this as in the form of a debate, which would mean like, what does it mean to destroy it? You could then argue, well, it doesn't get destroyed by anger. Well, wait a minute. How about the fact that a bodhisattva getting angry with another bodhisattva? Well, you assume if anyone dedicates his or her merit, then it's a bodhisattva. So the virtue still gets destroyed. Okay. And then what does it mean to be destroyed or not, etc. All right, let's leave it for now. It gives you something to discuss when you get together. All right. And let's now go back to the text. I've explained verse 6. And now the next part. Oh, something why I also mentioned Geshe Tupten Pesang. There was another reason, because Geshe Tupten Pesang, he gives this beautiful teaching on how important it is to accumulate merit and purify negativities. Did I talk about this before? Because I gave another class, and in one of those two classes I talked about. Did I talk about Geshe Tupten Pesang's teaching on accumulating merit and purifying negative? No, I didn't. Okay. All right. The part I'm translating right now, Geshe is saying accumulating virtue, which is usually, it's not like you accumulate virtue and you purifying negativity is something totally different. Usually they go hand in hand. And he talks about himself being a monk. being a naughty little monk who's only interested in studies. No, naughty as in like, well, naughty came a little later, but initially he was really good in the studies, but he was not interested in accumulating merit and purifying negativities. It was just not his thing. He would go to classes, he would go to debate, he would go to the pujas, but he's like, ugh, this accumulating merit. He didn't see any sense in that. But then he started investigating this, and he found out that those monks who did all the studies, they were doing really, really well. Sometimes when they studied the Dharma, initially they started off being really bright. Oh, they were better in their class. They did really well. If they neglected this practice of accumulating merit, that is citing prayers, citing mantras, and so forth, when they neglected that, over the years, you could tell, like he said, he really investigated that they got worse in their studies. It just didn't come around. They had this obstacle, that obstacle, etc. Whereas there were others that were the opposite. They started off not being very bright. They had a hard time understanding the logic, but because of their accumulating merit in the sense of doing prayers and having this faith and dedication, these well, that we associate less with wisdom, these aspects, then before long they hang into there. They had less obstacles and they become really good in their scriptures. So it's important to understand, if we have interest in the Dharma and we want to learn about the Dharma, but we also want to practice it. I mean, some may just want to study it and it's fun. But if you really want to develop your mind, you want to make a change in your life, you need to accumulate merit and purify negativities. There's no way around. Now that makes it sound like, so usually it's like when he says it, I was like, oh, so what does that mean? Hours and hours spent on purifying. And so he tells these stories, beautiful stories of this incredible teacher, again, Nima, who went with His Holiness to China and who was also Geshe-la's teacher. It's amazing. You get like, wow, a little piece of history, pure. Very beautiful, very incredible. But besides that, he's talking about again Nima, who gave him advice that he has to accumulate more merit. That was the time he wasn't interested. And he did. And he said the good thing about it, you can do it at the side and it still works. So if you just recite a mantra, if you recite mantras, that in itself, these words have a certain power in themselves. So you just recite them and accumulate a positive, virtuous motivation at the beginning. That's definitely important. But even if then you're distracted, you accumulate a lot of merit. And that's why a lot of the monks and nuns, whatever they're doing things, they recite mantras, sometimes loudly, sometimes, you can hardly see their lips moving. And I was thinking, if Corona has any benefit, is you put on a mask and no one sees you recite mantras. You just don't do them loudly. You go to a shop. I cannot go to a shop in Germany and go, they think I'm crazy. They're going to call security. I don't know. But with these masks now, no one sees what I do. I can recite long mantras, short mantras. I can do them full of passion. No one sees my mouth. Okay. So great. This is an opportunity. You go shopping, you go out, and you can accumulate a lot of merit. So Geshe was saying, you talked about this. He said, I mean, this is based on his teachers. Of course, it's even greater if you focus on it, etc. But if you can use shopping, etc., and you accumulate a lot of merit, wow, what an opportunity. So thanks to those masks, they have a lot of disadvantages, but I think that's an advantage. So I thought to just mention this as part of this week's practice. It's still patience. It's still, I would like you to focus on patience. And now I can tell the time is almost up. I didn't talk much about anything. We talk a lot about accumulating merit, accumulating a positive potential. Now, with these mantras, we need more discussions how they can be beneficial. And of course, going out of your way and helping others. Yes, that's no doubt about it. But you need to go shopping. You can do the shopping for another person as well, but you need to go shopping for yourself and you need to do certain things. So day-to-day stuff you still need to do. You need to go work. And now make it, this week is dedicated towards patience, and try to choose a mantra. His Holiness is very clear which mantra, of course, Green Tara. Now, His Holiness has told us, including you, everyone, Dadurumshi told you specifically to do green Tara. And then with the right kind of motivation, of course, may the disease subside, may sentient beings, everything you wish for all sentient beings. Put on your masks. And the moment you have your mask on, please try to recite the mantra silently, right? And you make a habit from it. I know so many Tibetans, like the moment they stop talking, it goes right away. Then make a habit of it. It's like one of those residues left on the mind, and you have a habit now accumulating merit. And in that way, you have more merit that something to fall back on in terms of getting angry. Okay, so sorry, that was a little bit. Well, we've done one verse at least today, and next time I'll definitely continue with this, but I felt this, I had this wish to share this particular passage with you, which I thought was so beautiful. Please read it if you have the time. Of course, it's only a draft, and parts of it read a little bit difficult. There's sometimes an article missing, slight, but it's almost perfect. So there's very little there, very little missing. Okay, great. Now we have a little bit time, maybe for one or two questions. And I've heard you already doing your discussion, so you're probably all right with questions, but just in case something came up. Oh, I need to go on the chat to see what you've written.
Just something small, if I may.
Please.
You were talking about 2 sutras and you mentioned only one, or am I wrong?
2 sutras, the Sutra of Akshamati, and the Sutra of Akshamati, and the Array of Tree Sutra. I think I mentioned both. Let me just go back to the text. Yes, the Array of Tree Sutra. So the teachings of Akshamati Sutra and the Array of Tree Sutra. Oh, yes. So I mentioned the meaning only. Yes, you're right. So I haven't the meaning of the second sutra. No, I mentioned both. So if you go to page 89, it says that the meaning of the first sutra is such and such, and the meaning of the second sutra is such and such. So if you read it again, it may become clearer. It's a little bit difficult. I'm not sure you walk away with understanding it totally. So you can, for next time, of course, in your discussion group, in your discussion group, you can of course discuss it fast. And if then there's still questions, we can definitely go into it. Yeah. So
Thank you.
yeah. There's a question by Doron Barak. Does anger harm the target person? No, just anger doesn't harm the other person. It's like when His Holiness the Dalai Lama says, compassion, just compassion, doesn't benefit the other person, benefits straight away you. If it affects your behavior in terms of your interaction with the other person, then of course it benefits the other person in the case of compassion. And in anger, if it's just anger, it doesn't harm the other person. But of course, if out of the anger you beat the other person, then there is a harm inflicted, but it's not the anger as like a karmic result. The other person must have created a certain karma that can now ripen in the other person. But if they haven't accumulated the karma to be harmed in that moment, your anger or my anger cannot harm the other person.
So then,
yes, please.
It's
you. Hi.
Yeah.
Hi,
why did we say that anger harms a regular person and harms more a bodhisattva?
No, sorry. I didn't say that right. I must have said it in a way that it wasn't clear. So it harms me because if I get angry, it harms me. If I get angry, it destroys root virtue. But that is true for an ordinary person. A certain amount of root virtue gets destroyed, but even more so a bodhisattva. If I get angry with a bodhisattva, then the root virtue that gets destroyed in that case is even worse. If me as an ordinary person, I get angry with another ordinary person, root virtue gets destroyed, yes, but even more root virtue gets destroyed if I get angry with the bodhisattva. Having said that, let's think of a bodhisattva. I'm not a bodhisattva, but a bodhisattva. You may be a bodhisattva. So let's say you're a bodhisattva And you get angry with another bodhisattva who's reached a higher spiritual level, then even you as a bodhisattva, you get harmed by your own anger in that it destroys your root virtue when you get angry with that higher bodhisattva. That's what it meant. So no matter who gets angry, root virtue gets destroyed, can get destroyed. It depends on the force of the anger, etc. Actually, as a person, once you reach the path of seeing, I don't think anger can manifest any longer, because here in the commentaries, it's very clear that you have such strong patience that even on the first level, you're only patient. But on the path of accumulation, the path of preparation, you can still get angry. And if even as a bodhisattva, you get angry with the bodhisattva, another bodhisattva, you also destroy your own root virtue. Doron, does that make sense? Okay. All right, so just something you can discuss. Reading Lama Tsongkhapa, how much exactly gets destroyed or not is really hard to tell. Just think of Ratnavali, think of Precious Garland, where it says you can't really measure those things. Those are just like numbers that are not exactly, but more. You, in other words, if you get angry with a person who has stronger bodhicitta, you can potentially destroy more root virtue. Whereas if you get angry with someone who doesn't have that strong bodhicitta, then again, the root virtue may get destroyed. Some virtue gets destroyed, or root virtue gets destroyed, but not as much. Depends also on the target. So who you get angry with. So don't get angry with His Holiness. This is something I'm really worried about my mom sometimes. If I have a lot of work with translation work, and I'm and she's like, "Well, you got so much work," and I keep saying, "No, but I've chosen," because I'm worried she may say, "Why does the Dharma?" Because she's not dedicated to His Holiness. So when I don't have time because I can't do this, that, and the other. So one time she reacted a little annoyed, and I was really afraid that she would get angry with His Holiness, because I mean, if His Holiness is not a Buddha, then he's a very high bodhisattva. So be really careful to be at a teaching and go, why does His Holiness have to talk so long? Oh, it's potentially, right, dangerous if you believe this to be the case. I mean, even if you don't believe, that's just how anger works, like how it destroys parts of our mind, root virtues for that matter. In the case of because as I said, people who've dedicated their lives, they are everything towards the welfare of all sentient beings. Getting angry with them is like indirectly also getting angry with other sentient beings. No, having this getting angry with other sentient beings in the sense, like anger has this harmful vibe to it, even though you don't harm the other person, but it's that intention that's like this not that you always have the intention to harm others, but it has that function to it, even if it doesn't express itself, and therefore you indirectly also harming other sentient beings. Does that make sense? Okay, it's a little complicated. It's difficult territory, but never mind. It gives you something to think about. Okay, anyway, my answer was too long now, so let's start the meditation. The meditation I'd like you to do today, that I'll lead you through as usual. At the beginning, at the start of this session, I talked about how anger arises. And for now, I would like you to, well, I'll lead you through it, as I said, to go through these steps, how you get from A to Z, which helps us to understand anger better, of course, recognize it better, and be able, therefore, to apply the antidote. Okay. So as usual, we start with a few moments of breathing. So since we discussed the harmful effects of anger, let's make an effort to identify the function of anger. What does it actually mean? What is this mental factor of anger? It is described as a mental function that wishes to be separated from something or wishes to harm something or someone out of an exaggerated sense of the negativity of the focus of our anger. It exaggerates whatever negative aspect that led to our anger. So in the case of insult, it exaggerates the negative aspect of the insult. And what is the root of this particular mental function? Or mental factor? It is the basic misapprehension of reality. So try to see whether you can identify that misapprehension within yourself. Sense that there's something that is the I. That if I look for it long enough, I'll find somewhere where there are mind and body. My mind and my body. Somewhere there must be my I or myself. A self that is happy at times, one that is meditating right now, and that feels frustrated at other times. So check whether you can get that sense of an I, of a self, from your own experience. So what is perceiving, what is apprehending that I, that thing that's intrinsic, inherent to my body and my mind. It's a type of mind, a type of consciousness that perceives that I, that wrongly perceives such an intrinsic self. It appears to that mind, and the mind holds on to it. Holds on to that appearance as existing the way it appears. And that gives rise then to the self-centered attitude, which is a slightly different mind in that it holds this I that I've previously identified. It holds that to be more important, and its happiness to be more important than that of others. So see whether you can recognize that self-centeredness within yourself. And now think of a situation when someone insults you. Says something that is truly offensive. Insulting words that are directed at me, at the I. Can you get a sense that the negativities of these words is much stronger when they're directed at me versus they're directed at a stranger? Since I associate these offensive words with me, another mind arises that perceives the negativity of those words and of the person who's spoken those words in a very exaggerated way. Those words become unbearable, and the person who's spoken the words are truly bad, truly insulting. Try to recognize that sense of exaggeration. And the anger then arises when the mind that exaggerates that negativity of the insult and the person speaking it, mainly the person, now focuses on the person and wants to be away from that person, or maybe even harm that person. That is a mind that is potentially extremely harmful if I allow it to direct my actions of speech and body. And it is not grounded in a realistic apprehension of myself, of the insult, and the other person. Having exaggerated my own importance, out of my basic misapprehension, I've also exaggerated the negative aspects of the insult directed at me. And of the person insulting me. And since this mind not only may induce negative actions, but when it becomes active in my mental continuum, it can also destroy a lot of the root virtues I've accumulated in the past. So let's therefore complete this meditation by generating the determination that in the coming week, I will do all I can to recognize this disruptive and harmful mind, and then to apply the antidotes, patience or love, or just simple mindfulness by focusing on the anger itself instead of focusing on the insult by another person or whatever else has made me angry. And then let's, of course, dedicate whatever virtue we have accumulated towards our own enlightenment, towards our ability to purify our mind from all its harmful residues, to be able to bring forth all its positive qualities for the benefit of all sentient beings. And with this motivation, let's do the dedication prayer. Okay, thank you. May all beings everywhere, plagued by sufferings of body and mind, obtain an ocean of happiness and joy by virtue of my merits. May no living creature suffer, commit evil, or ever fall ill. May no one be afraid or belittled with a mind weighed down by depression. May the blind see forms and the deaf hear sounds. May those whose bodies are worn with toil be restored on finding repose. May the naked find clothing, the hungry find food. May the thirsty find water and delicious drink. May the poor find wealth, those weak with sorrow find joy. May the forlorn find hope, constant happiness, and prosperity. May there be timely rains and bountiful harvests. May all medicines be effective and wholesome prayers bear fruit. May all who are sick and ill quickly be freed from their ailments. Whatever diseases there are in the world, may they never occur again. May the frightened cease to be afraid, and those bound be freed. May the powerless find power, and may people think of benefiting each other. For as long as space remains, for as long as sentient beings remain, until then may I too remain to dispel the miseries of the world. Okay, thank you very much. I've clearly gone over time, so without saying much more, please don't forget your homework for this week. What I would like you to focus on: accumulating merit, focusing on your anger, applying the antidote, and of course your motivation of bodhicitta to generate the mind of enlightenment for the welfare of all sentient beings. Okay, great. Have a great week, and I'll see you again next Sunday.
Thank you so much.
Geshe-ma.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Geshe-la.
Okay, bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Geshe-ma.
Bye.
Thank you, Geshe-ma.
Thank you, everyone. We will meet here again next week. Bye-bye.